If you're like us, you've probably seen references to something called Munchausen's by proxy and been curious, without really understanding what it is or how it may affect people. That's why we were excited to hear about the new podcast, Nobody Should Believe Me.
The host, novelist Andrea Dunlop, takes an in-depth look at this subject. No one has ever done this before. She talks with people who have been affected by this condition. She even speaks with a perpetrator.
We've already listened to the first 2 episodes, and we can tell you that Andrea doesn't dwell on the darkness. She takes great pains not to be gory or exploitative. This show has heart. It focuses on the humanity of everyone involved.
And what makes this podcast extra special is that Andrea has a deeply personal connection to this subject. Someone very close to her was investigated for Munchausen by proxy. That gives the show a real emotional punch. When Andrea is listening to people tell stories about how they've been affected by this condition, she is not some uninvolved outsider. She has lived through the very same pain they have. She understands them. And through this podcast, she helps all of us understand them too.
New episodes drop every Thursday. Listen and subscribe to Nobody Should Believe Me on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Hi there, everybody. This is Áine and Kevin from the Murder Sheet. We are currently reporting from the Peru Public Library here in Peru, Indiana. We are trying to get this latest episode out to you as fast as possible, so we apologize if it sounds a little bit more raw, a little bit less rehearsed than usual. We're currently in a conference room that the library very kindly loaned us, and we're just kind of doing this on the fly. So this is unscripted. We're just telling you what we saw here today.
And we'll explain why it's unscripted and why we're here as we go along.
Exactly. My name is Áine Cain. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
We first connected while looking into the Burger Chef murders, an Indiana cold case. Together, we built a spreadsheet documenting hundreds of cases of restaurant-related homicides. That original spreadsheet gave way to our podcast, the Murder Sheet.
Now we maintain that same research-centric, investigative approach as we look into all sorts of homicides, including unsolved cases, historical crimes, and, of course, restaurant murders.
We don't just chat about the headlines. Our podcast is a platform for our journalism. The Murder Sheet focuses on investigative reporting, thoughtful analysis, thorough research, and in-depth interviews.
We're the Murder Sheet.
And this is the Delphi Murders, Kegan Kline's October 2022 pre-trial conference.
So, as I'm sure you heard, today Kegan Kline had a pre-trial conference in his criminal case. And of course, his criminal case is limited to his child sexual abuse material charges. He's not been charged with anything directly related to the Delphi murders. So this pre-trial conference only dealt with the child sexual abuse materials charges.
So what exactly is a pretrial conference for people who are not familiar with that term, like in the legal system?
A pretrial conference is before the trial. The lawyers get together and talk with each other and with the judge to try to determine basically the rules for how the trial will proceed. You know, is this piece of evidence going to be admissible, or is that piece of evidence going to be admissible? So sometimes it can just be very dry, matter of fact about scheduling. It can also be more dramatic than that. In pretrial conferences, that can also be an opportunity. If there is a plea deal that happens, which means there won't be a trial, the plea deal is often revealed at a pretrial conference.
So important for us to go and cover it. We had a feeling, I think, from our sources that this was not going to be an explosive pretrial conference, but we tried to report on this case as diligently as possible, so we decided to go up and see for ourselves and report on the ground, essentially.
Right. And it's important to note that this pretrial conference did attract some media attention, not just from us. In fact, it attracted so much media attention that the judge in the case, Timothy Spar, decided to issue a pretrial courtroom management and decorum order. And that was basically him giving the rules, not to the lawyers, not to the defendant, but giving rules for the rest of us, the people who are in the media or people who are in the public who are interested in this case and plan to attend. He's basically telling us what we are allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do. And you often see these types of orders issued in cases that get a lot of attention.
So it's not necessarily every case is going to get a decorum order. In fact, we sat through a couple of other sentencing hearings and pretrial hearings that did not issue one for because they're not of public interest necessarily. They're not getting coverage from reporters. But since the Kegan Kline trial is, that's why they released it.
It got a decorum order. And what's interesting about it is that he was more flexible than other judges often are. Not too long ago, we attended a sentencing hearing for a person convicted of murder. And during that sentencing hearing, we were not, for instance, allowed to take notes on our phone. But this judge does allow such things. It's also, this is getting ahead just a little bit, but I think it's worth noting that in the text of this order, this decorum order, the judge does say that he will be issuing more detailed orders for the actual trial of Kegan Kline. Mm-hmm. And today he elaborated a little bit on what that meant. He indicated that there would be orders issued for the trial, as I say, that will go into considerably more detail about what will be allowed and what won't be allowed at the trial. And he even went so far to say is that among the attorneys, they were discussing the possibility of having a day when the reporters could come in and there could be a hearing basically just for them, where they get to hear personally some of the practical rules of the courtroom. In other words, that wouldn't be a time for them to talk with each other about the substance of the case from the attorneys. But they would learn, for instance, where here's a room you can go to file a story, or here's a room you can go to talk to people, and things like that. So it was encouraging that he's having the foresight to carefully plan these things ahead of time.
Absolutely. So it's not a chaotic media circus situation, that everything is sort of orderly and professional. And it certainly indicates that they anticipate that Kegan Kline's trial, though it is not directly linked to the Delphi case, will be getting a lot of media scrutiny.
One question a lot of people have had about this pretrial conference today is, was it about the Delphi murders?
And the answer is definitely not. We feel that the prosecution in this case, which of course is the Miami County Prosecutor's Office, is very much, siloed this case. They have very strong charges against Kegan Kline for a variety of charges related to child sexual abuse materials, possession, and distribution. And basically, that's what they're arguing. It does not behoove the prosecution in this case or in any case to be sort of stretching and introducing inappropriately connections to another case entirely, which is a Carroll County case, first of all, the homicides of Liberty German and Abigail Williams. And it just would not be an appropriate venue to be linking that too much, because basically, as I understand it as a layperson, the trial is about the charges, and the charges are about the CSAM and not about Delphi. So you can't just be bringing in every bad thing that Kegan Kline is connected with. That would not be fair. That would be a total violation of what the law process is supposed to do.
Yes, this was about the child sexual abuse material trial. And it is not about any charges which Kegan Kline does not even face about Delphi. So even though we've been told repeatedly by people behind the scenes that they believe that Kegan Kline has relevant information about what happened at Delphi, this was not the time or the place to discuss that. Today was just devoted to the practical matters of what do we need to know to continue planning Kegan Kline's trial.
So in terms of how we went about covering this, we got up very early for us, which was 6 a.m., and we sort of hopped in the car and headed up to Peru, Indiana from the Indianapolis area. And basically, it was, on the drive up, we're sort of seeing the sun rise over the cornfields. We've come up here quite a lot over time, so I feel like we've kind of gotten to know the place a little bit better every time we come up here. And this time was no different. The first time I believe we've been in the courthouse in Peru, Indiana, which is, of course, is the seat of Miami County. And, beautiful building, lots of different government administrative offices located therein. When we kind of headed up to the third floor, that's where we found where we were supposed to be, the circuit court. I think it was one of the prettier courtrooms I've ever been in. I'll just say that. They had all these wooden pews, like a church almost, is like a red cloth draped behind the judge's bench. So it certainly looked a little bit more like the classical courtroom that you think of when you see, watch movies or television than I think you tend to see in real life. So very nicely appointed room. But we were the first people there in terms of people who were looking to cover the Kegan Kline case.
We were the first people there, period. When we arrived a bit before 8:30 this morning, the courtroom was completely empty.
We showed up early because we have a tendency to get lost, and I think we just wanted to make sure we were going to get there and get seating if there were a lot of media outlets there to cover, which there turned out to be. But in addition, we just wanted to kind of get a sense of the judge's style, because he will be trying the Kegan Kline case and sometimes getting to see, a number of other kind of smaller cases and hearings ahead of time can kind of give you a sense of what sort of personality the judge brings to the table, what sort of style, and I think we're definitely interested in seeing that.
And since we got here so early, we did actually get a chance to see the judge conduct several other pretrial conferences and even a sentencing hearing. And so that gave us a certain sense of his style. And what did you think of his style?
I found Judge Sparr to be very amiable, definitely very friendly, but forceful, not a pushover, not a bully. Very much keen to explain everything to people involved, whether that's the plaintiff or whether that's the defendant or the other lawyers. He's just kind of very, very trying to be very clear about everything. And I believe you observed one instance while I was off going to Aroma to get a chai latte that you felt was an interesting characterization of the judge and his style.
Yes. He was finishing up one of a pretrial conference in another case, and as he was doing this, a member of the audience actually tried to address the judge with some questions. And as you may or may not know, that's simply not done. People who are sitting in the spectator section are not supposed to try to address the judge.
It's not a press conference.
It's not a press conference. Basically, the only people who have the right to speak to a judge are attorneys or, parties in a case. So this is unheard of. But they tried to ask the judge some questions, and I think I've known and experienced several judges who would have responded with that not too well. But Judge Sparr was kind and patient, and he said, it's not really my role to take questions from the gallery. He found out from the person what information they were seeking, and he told them where they could go to obtain that information in a friendly way that made the person asking the question feel respected, and they left thanking the judge. So the judge treated that person with kindness and patience. And I would also say that in some of the other pretrial conferences that happened, there were technical glitches because some of them took place over Zoom. There were lawyers who were late, and Judge Spar reacted to all of these little blips in the schedule with patience and grace, certainly more patience and grace than I've seen in a lot of other judges.
There you go. So I feel, that kind of brings us nicely to the case of Kegan Kline, which was scheduled for 10 a.m. and I believe did kick up around then. Basically, the judge announced that, he knew that a lot of us there, especially us in the media, we had like a little row that was sort of cordoned off for us behind the prosecutor's desk. He knew that a lot of us were there for that, and that we would take a short recess and then get into that case.
And I guess we're taking a short recess too, and we'll be back in a moment with what happened.
So as we mentioned up top, we had a sense from talking with sources that this pretrial hearing was not going to be an explosive event filled with twists and turns, that it was going to be very much a pro forma hearing. And so that sort of was where our expectations were coming into this. And that's, I think our expectations here were met.
And another thing we knew before going in is we had been notified that Kegan Kline himself would not be making an appearance in the courtroom. Before today, there had been a lot of speculation and rumors that Kegan Kline himself would be in the courtroom, but he was not, and we got that information last night.
So when it came time to sort of set up that Zoom call, Kegan Kline and his attorney, Andrew Oct, appeared on the monitor from, I believe, Miami County Jail, where he is currently incarcerated and has been so for the past 2 years.
And the special camera was also set up just to show the courtroom. So presumably Kegan Kline got a chance to see all of us sitting in the courtroom, including you and me in the front row.
Yes, us with the other media. So he was able to probably see that, definitely there was a turnout that of people who were interested in the case.
And of course, we got to see Kegan Kline.
Yes.
What did he look like?
He looked different, I think, than his booking photo. He certainly still seems to be quite, pale, which I guess being in jail, that can happen, not getting as much sunlight. He wore the traditional sort of orange and white striped jail garb. You could just see his shirt, but that was sort of the design. And it's hard to say if he gained weight because we really only saw him from, the chest up, I would say. But he certainly didn't look like he had lost weight, if that makes sense. And the most notable change, I thought, his hair looked more closely cropped to his head than I think I'd remembered, at least. And
to me, his hairline also looked like it had receded a great bit more since the last time we'd seen him publicly, which I guess was his booking photo.
Yeah, booking photo and the 2021 HLN interview. There was some footage run with that. I just thought he looked a little bit different from that. But, I guess nothing dramatically seemed too different. It still looked like Kegan. He, throughout this, did not speak at all, I believe. I don't believe he said one word in this. His attorney spoke for him, which, of course, is, often how these things go. And he was very, very still, very silent, not expressive in terms of his, face or anything like that. So he was certainly a presence there, but he was a very silent and, hard to read presence for sure, I would say. His attorney, Andrew Oct, was in the room with him. It's interesting. You could see behind them what looked like a guard from the jail, just kind of like hovering in the corner. But, Oct was this, lawyer, suit, blue tie, sort of doing the talking for his client here.
Which is typical.
That's not unusual. I think people might expect from the movies that a defendant is going to get up and give a whole speech, but oftentimes they don't testify even during the trial.
Well, the reason you hire an attorney is because you want someone who is experienced at speaking in court to speak in court for your behalf.
Yeah, why would you want to, so that's nothing here nor there. It's just maybe people's expectations can be a little different just because they're set by social, like by pop culture.
Yeah, if I'm going to hire someone to cut my yard, I'm not going to go out there and cut my yard myself.
Yeah, that's just reinventing the wheel. And basically, the hearing was, we should say the prosecution's state was represented here by Pete Dietrichs, who's one of the assistant prosecutors in Miami County.
And I believe he's the lead prosecutor on this Kegan Kline case,
He is the lead. Yeah, he's the lead prosecutor on this one. And he was accompanied today by Jeff Sinkovics, who is the Miami County prosecutor, who's not the lead, but was present here at this hearing at least to, I guess, support his colleague.
And I guess his presence also reflects the importance of this case.
Yes. It's going to be one that, he previously in the hearings before this had appeared on Zoom. So he was down, I guess, in his office or something sort of talking. And in this case, he came up and was physically present for what happened. So the prosecutors were present in the room with us. So was the judge, but the defense and the defendant, Kegan Kline, were on the Zoom monitor. So that's how it sort of all worked together. And the hearing was...
It was less than 5 minutes.
Startlingly brief. It was not a long, drawn-out meeting. And you kind of got the sense immediately that it was not going to be a long meeting. Basically, it was Judge Sparr, asking questions, and everybody sort of tersely replying, and that was it.
And the questions were scheduling questions. Judge Sparr said, we know that there's another pretrial conference currently scheduled for December 22nd, and the trial is scheduled for this date in January. Do all the parties intend to keep those dates? And that's an interesting question, because anyone who's followed this case is well aware that Kegan Kline's court hearings have continually been postponed and delayed. And the last time he had a hearing come up, it was delayed because Mr. Oct said negotiations were in process. And that kind of language makes a lot of people speculate and wonder if there is a plea in the works. And what is interesting is that about the same time Mr. Oct filed the motion with that language about negotiations being in process, that was when we saw some very interesting searches. We saw the search at the Wabash River. We saw the search at the burn pit at the home of Kegan Kline's grandparents. And so a lot of people put two and two together and said to themselves that it sounds as if these negotiations that are in process probably, likely, possibly could be connected to maybe Kegan Kline is giving the authorities information which led to these searches. Those searches happened over a month ago. And what do we know about the results of those searches?
Basically, our understanding is that from the burn pit search in Kegan Kline's grandparents' property's backyard was that nothing was found. And that in terms of the water search that was several weeks ongoing in the Wabash River in Peru, Indiana, very near the Kline household, that there was no blockbuster find with that. Although that doesn't necessarily mean that nothing was found, but certainly nothing that was, I would say, game-changing is our understanding from talking with sources. Now, to be clear, let's be clear about our opinions on this. I think we were in the camp of there appears to at least be discussions around a plea deal happening. Whether how serious that was or the point to which that led, I don't think we can report on because I don't think we have that information confirmed. But I think we
don't.
But I think we were very much in the camp of something is happening. There are discussions ongoing. There are negotiations for sure. I mean, that was pretty plain.
That was pretty plain. And was also pretty plain today is that the judge said, is the next pretrial conference still on? Is the trial still on? and all parties said yes.
Yes, prosecution said yes emphatically, defense said yes emphatically. We do not need any additional time.
This is a speculative question. Does that make you think that perhaps negotiations are no longer in process?
That is absolutely my conjecture from these facts, because if negotiations had allowed them to reach a plea deal, then I believe we would have heard about that today, because there would be no trial and there'd be no further need to do anything. Now, if the negotiations were ongoing and they felt that they were fruitful and they needed more time, I would imagine that they would want to now postpone the December 22nd pretrial conference, because they would, that's right around the holidays too. So logistically, you're having to bring people together for that. So maybe you want to say, well, actually, let's do it in January and let's move the trial back even further. So the fact that neither of those things happened would indicate that, whatever communications were going on, whatever negotiations were in play, are no longer in play. Now, that's not to say that, that stasis will exist until the trial. Things can change. As we know in this case, things can change at any time. All it takes is for, some additional information to come out or whatnot. So I don't think we can necessarily say it's all over, because we don't have a crystal ball. We can't look at the future. But I think we can pretty solidly conclude from today's hearing that whatever negotiations that Andriaki was referring to in his previous filing do not seem to be taking place today.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
We don't want to come out and just sort of put too much emphasis on things we cannot see, because I don't feel like we have a lot of information about what exactly is happening right now in terms of negotiations, past or present. We don't know what the roadblock was, if there was one, or did people's minds change? What happened? Was it the results or lack thereof of the search that prompted the breakdown? We don't know.
All we can offer is informed speculation. We wish we had more solid information to report on this, but we don't.
No, but we can draw some intelligent and informed conclusions from things that are very much plain and open and in the public record, which is that the trial is on and everybody seems to be saying full steam ahead.
The other matter that was discussed during this very brief pretrial conference was the prosecution and the defense arranged to meet for purposes of discovery. Discovery meetings and things of this nature are basically, of course, the prosecution isn't allowed to pull any rabbits out of the hat during a trial. They're not allowed to surprise the defense. They have to lay all their cards down on the table. And so that means that the prosecution has to provide the defense with every bit of information they have about the evidence they have against their client. So that's what this discovery meeting is about.
So in addition to that, what do we make of a discovery process in a case that is so very much technical in terms of you have multiple devices with horrific CSAM materials on them? What could that look like? It seems to me that would be a pretty extensive process to basically get the defense all of the materials that the prosecution is looking at. Yeah,
it's a really, really detailed, lengthy process. So much of this case, so much of the evidence in this case involves evidence from digital devices. My phone has, I think, like 74 gig of memory, and that's enough to hold several thousand books, several thousand pictures, what have you. So, and there are multiple devices involved in this case. So just try to picture and imagine the sheer number of images, of chat transcript pages, and so on that exist on these devices that have to be given and shared with the defense so that they can examine them.
So, Kevin, as an attorney, what are your thoughts on the December pretrial conference? One, granted that it occurs, and two, that it occurs, I guess, then and at all. Because, I mean, from the tone of this one, this October conference. It would indicate that full steam ahead for trial. It's going to take place in December. What would you expect the prosecution and the defense to discuss at that one? Because it seems like so very little was discussed in this October event.
There's always a possibility of pleas being discussed or of charges possibly being dropped. But if the trial's going forward, a final pretrial conference might be an opportunity for, if you have a jury, for instance, the jury will be read instructions by the judge on how they should think about the charges and how they should arrive at their decisions. And so often at a final pretrial conference, you hear both the defense and the prosecution will offer proposed jury instructions. So it's often just things like that, just housekeeping.
So I guess in terms of, if charge, you mentioned the possibility of charges being dropped. What would that look like in this case? He's facing 30 charges. If some of them are dropped, does that mean the case is weak or it's falling apart?
No, there are lots of reasons why charges may be dropped in a case like this. The prosecution has an obligation to only go forward with charges that it can definitively prove every element of. And so often in cases involving child sexual abuse materials, the charges involve images of young people in sexual acts. And if you don't know the identity of the person in those images, it can sometimes be difficult to, for instance, determine what their actual age is. And so often these images will be examined by doctors who will look for secondary sexual characteristics and such and estimate what the person's age is. And so sometimes in instances like that, you will have a prosecutor will make a charge about an image he thinks involves someone underage, but then a doctor examines it and says, I can't testify that that person is underage, so then that one particular charge will be dropped. So it's possible that a few charges against Kegan Kline may be dropped for technical reasons like that. But I'm confident that the bulk of the charges will remain in place, and the evidence against him on those charges appears to be quite strong.
And we even recently attended a sentencing hearing where it sounded like a judge almost dropped or kind of vacated a few charges that a person had been convicted on because it kind of butted up against the issue of double jeopardy. It was like, we can't convict him of both of these, essentially. So, I mean, I'm not saying that that's a case in this one. We just don't know going into it. But
we just don't know.
But we're just talking about possibilities that could happen, given that it happens. I guess let's turn this around and try to bring it back to the Delphi case a little bit more, because obviously I would say most people are paying attention to this case, horrific as it is, the amount of horrific images that were found on this person's phone and devices. They're paying attention to it because it has been linked to the Delphi case. So it would be helpful to reiterate for everyone why this should be of interest to people who are looking at Delphi. I'll start. Basically, this guy, Kegan Kline, he was publicly linked to the Anthony Schatz account that police tied to the Delphi case. And in the transcripts that we uncovered from August 2020, back when he was first arrested, they, revealed that, detectives said that he had been in contact with Liberty German, up to the day of her murder.
So we have a person with a known interest of a sexual nature in underage females. We have this person having communication with a young girl who was murdered on the very day that this young girl was murdered.
And detectives even said that Liberty was very much interested in meeting this man, who she believed to be a teenager closer to her own age. And that altogether is just, incredibly heartbreaking and disturbing, but kind of is why this case in some ways is tied to the Delphi case. So in the meantime, we'll try to kind of stay on top of things. I just want to say that, visiting Peru is always a pleasure because I feel like the people up here are very, very nice. And we've gotten to meet a few folks here today, and very, very nice people. And
thank you all for being so kind to us.
Yeah.
And a special thanks to the people here at the Peru Library.
Yeah, they're terrific. But we really appreciate them allowing us to crash here and just kind of record on the fly. And that was very nice of them. And so thanks to them. The lady who scheduled us was so nice. And so thanks to her in particular. And I would just say that, this is a really horrific crime and a really horrific thing happening in Peru, but it doesn't take away from it's a very nice town. Lots of nice people up here.
Town has a great history. There's great connections to the circus. And also Cole Porter, the great songwriter who Kurt Vonnegut once called the most sophisticated man who ever lived. Cole Porter was born in Peru, Indiana. And every year they have a Cole Porter Festival honoring him, and that's always a great time.
We just mentioned that because sometimes, we focus on the negative, obviously. We're a true crime podcast. We're focusing on criminal acts, and this is a really horrific one. Whether it's the CSAM trial or it's the brutal murder of two very, very loved girls up in Delphi. But we do want to say that, that something horrible happening shouldn't necessarily taint the whole town. And we've certainly talked about a lot of bad things happening in Peru and Delphi, but we've also talked to so many kind and wonderful people from both places. We just want to, kind of give that a shout out as well. But anyways, thanks so much for listening to us. Thanks for bearing with us in a more sort of live format. And, keep us posted. Feel free to always send us tips if you hear anything. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks so much for listening to the Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Greenlee, who composed the music for the Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.